It's one of my greatest shames as an Australian reader that I haven't read a lot of Own Voices Indigenous content. It's frankly quite embarrassing. This video is kind of my way of expressing that to you guys and making myself follow through on what I keep saying in my head is like, ooh, I want to read that. So that's what this is. You could take this as some kind of TBR video. I guess this is a TBR video, but also just like these books exist in case you're interested. This video is inspired by a comment that I got on a recent video by, I believe it was Vamps Rocks, and they said that they were interested in recommendations for Indigenous Australian fiction and that sort of thing. I was very excited when I got that comment because I realized how much we just don't talk about Indigenous Australian books, and that's a real shame. So I got halfway through my big chunky paragraph answer to that comment when I realized I could just make a video about this. So I finished the comment and now I'm making the video about this. I think I have 12 books to talk about in this video, and of these 12 I've only read one, which is unfortunate. I think I own 5 of the books that I'm going to talk about in this video. I believe it's 12, I'm not really sure. I'm not all that organized for this video, but here we go, this is it. I will link some resources if I can find them in the description. I'm coming into this video very cautiously because I'm aware that I have absolutely no Indigenous Australian heritage whatsoever, and I am not qualified to talk about these books in any capacity. All of the books that I'm going to be mentioning in this video are Own Voices Indigenous narratives, so I'm really excited to get to all of them throughout the year, however long it takes me to read all of these books, interspersed with all of the other books that I want to read. It's an ever-growing list, so that's fine. This is in no particular order. I just want to read these books, so here we go. Becoming Kirralie Lewis by Jane Harrison is a young adult historical novel that follows a girl named Kirralie who was adopted into a white family. She's living in the 80s and she goes to study at university in Sydney, and when she's there she kind of realises that there's a lot more to her identity and her Indigenous Australian identity than she first realised, I believe. I believe that's what it's about. Her journey of self-discovery, but we are also intercutting it with flashbacks back to her birth mother and her struggle living in the 60s. So I'm very interested in this book. I included this book on my 5-star predictions video that I made a couple weeks ago, and I'm very excited to read it. It's going to be a good one. Yes, the next one is Songs That Sound Like Blood by Jared Thomas. This is a queer, contemporary young adult novel. This follows Roxy Mae Redding, who has lived her whole life in a very small town up north. She moves to the city to study music and make new friends, discovers that her new life is a lot more challenging than she initially expected, and she's thrown for even more of a loop when she develops this unexpected crush on the local music journo, Anna. This book is about music, it's about self-discovery and coming of age. I'm very excited to read it. I'm sure it's going to be great. Yes, this is why I don't make book haul videos, is because I feel like I can't talk about books properly if I haven't read them. You know, I'm just not good at it. Jack Davis is a really well-celebrated Noongar poet and playwright. I have 2 plays that he wrote. I believe he only wrote 2, but he might have written more. I'm not sure. I read No Sugar in school. This was part of our Year 12 required reading, and this follows the Millamara family who are standing up against the Australian government's protection in the 1930s and what that looked like and how they're standing up against that. And I really like this play. This is probably one of my favourite things that I had to read for school. It was really, really good, and if you get a chance to get your hands on this, and if you're interested in reading plays, I would highly recommend No Sugar. The Dreamers is the other play by him that I own. I haven't read this one yet because I got it really recently. As far as I can tell, this follows a country family and a man called Old Uncle Warru. He is in his last days, and it's kind of, as far as I can tell, it's kind of a reflection on colonization and urbanization and the transformation of the land and that sort of thing. So I'm very interested to read this. Meet Me at the Intersection is an anthology of short stories and I believe a few collections of poems. It's edited by Rebecca Lim and Amberlynn Quay Molina. I will just read you the back because this describes it better than I ever could. Own voice memoir, poetry and short fiction by writers who are First Nations, people of colour, LGBTQA+, or Living with Disability, Exploring Life from Each Author's Unique Perspective. Literature without diversity presents a false image of what it is to be human. We invite you into our worlds. Meet us at the intersection. So it's all about intersectionality. There are a lot of Indigenous Australian voices in this, and I've read a couple of the stories in this, but I'm very excited to read more. I think it's going to be great. That's all of the books that I own, so let's move on to the books that I don't own, and I've just had in my Goodreads to read forever. Catching Teller Crow by Amberlynn and Ezekiel Quay Molina is a young adult paranormal mystery book. Beth Teller is dead, and her dad, who is a grieving detective, is the only one who can see or hear her. And amidst her dad's grief, they have to work together to solve this local mystery that surrounds a fire that killed a man and a mysterious girl named Isabel Catching. Of all the books on this list, this is the one that I've heard mentioned the most, just around like bookish spaces, as few and far between as they are for this sort of thing. I'm very excited to pick this book up because I think it's going to be an interesting look at grief, but also a fun, like, YA mystery sort of thing. I don't know, I'm very interested in this. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it's gonna be good. I'm excited for it. Heat and Light by Ellen Van Neerven is a collection of queer Indigenous Australian short stories. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know that it deals with, like, the future and the past, familial, generational legacy. It's very mystical and deals with, like, freedom and belonging and themes along those sorts of lines. So I'm very interested in reading that because Ellen Van Neerven also appears in this anthology. So I might read her story in this or whatever she's got in this, and then I'll pick up Heat and Light. But yeah, see, it all sort of intersects. It all, yeah, there we go. Too Much Lit by Melissa Lukashenko. I believe it's just an award-winning book that won just like one award last year, but I've seen it everywhere. It's like in every bookstore. I'm so excited to read this book. It's adult literary fiction, and it might be queer, but I'm not sure. I was at a Pride event last November, and there was like a book stand, and Too Much Lip was on there, but whenever I've tried to do more research into whether or not this book is actually queer, I can't find anything. So it might be queer, but it also might not be queer. Either way, I'm excited to read it. Carrie Salter is a woman who spent her life avoiding two things: her hometown and prison. But now back home, her pop is dying and she's inches away from getting locked up. So she's having to ride home on a stolen Harley. I've heard that this book is all about forgiveness and redemption. This book is described as like hilarious, but also really gritty. I'm very excited to read this book, not only because it's an award-winning book and it's been everywhere in every bookstore, but I just like the cover as well. It just looks great. I'm very excited to read from the perspective of like an adult Indigenous Australian woman as well, because that's not a perspective that you see a lot of, especially in Australian literary fiction. So that's going to be very interesting for me. I'm very excited about that. The Swan Book by Alexis Wright. Alexis Wright is kind of one of the more celebrated Indigenous Australian literary fiction writers in Australia. She has another book called Carpentaria, which is, I believe it's her more popular, but The Swan Book, if I'm being brutally honest, this one book sounds a bit more interesting to me. It's an adult sci-fi dystopian, and it follows a young mute woman named Oblivia. The world that Alexis Wright has painted is deeply affected by climate change, and I read like some kind of quote or review from somewhere that this book paints the climate emergency that white people dread and illustrates how that is already affecting Indigenous Australian cultures and communities across Australia, which sounds really, really interesting to me. Just from reading the Goodreads synopsis, I have underlined that this book is dark and bleak, so go be aware of that if you're looking to pick this up. But it sounds really, really interesting to me, and I'm very excited. Apparently it's like a really good cast of characters in this. So yeah, I'm excited about the Swan Book. Kim Scott is a multi-award winning Noongar West Australian author. His novel Taboo is literary adult fiction. I've heard a lot about it over the past couple years. It's supposed to be really creepy. It follows a group of Noongar people who are invited to a taboo place. Taboo place is the site of a massacre that followed the assassination of a white man who had stolen a black woman. Does that make sense? I think so. On the site, a massacre took place, but that massacre was the result of the assassination of a white man who had stolen a black woman. Yes, okay, that makes sense. This is meant to be very creepy and very haunting. I'm very excited to read it just because I want to read something by Kim Scott, and I feel like this is a good place to start because it's his most recent. I believe it's his most recent. We got a new cover recently, so this is where I'm starting. You can't stop me. This is where I'm starting. Wraith is a young adult science fiction novel by Shane and Alex Smithers. I believe this is on the younger end of young adult, but you know, I'm still gonna read it. James is a boy who grew up in rural New South Wales, and his friend is helping him learn how to fly. Like literally fly. But then he stumbles upon a hidden city in the clouds. Then he meets this young girl, and James becomes caught up in this adventure to save the hidden city from the effect of climate change with some kind of mysterious technology. That's all I know about it, and I'm very interested to read it. I think it's going to be a fun adventure, and you know, I'm interested in it. It's going to be good. I don't know how to talk about books that I haven't read. I think we've established it at this point, but I'm interested in it. It's going to be good. I'm sorry about the lack of quality in this video, but here you go. Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe is adult non-fiction. It's a multi-award winning book, and it is a book that academically deconstructs the lie of the hunter-gatherer tag put upon pre-colonial Indigenous Australians by the white colonizers. And that's kind of a tag, that hunter-gatherer tag is still something that is very prevalent in a lot of people's discussions surrounding Indigenous Australians, still in like contemporary Australia. We did a unit on this in my first year of university. I'm interested in reading this because I think it'll give me a much better reference point for all this sort of stuff. Like I want to have something that I can go back to and read again and again. And obviously, as we're still discovering new things, new books will come out with more information, but this is kind of where I want to start with Indigenous Australian non-fiction. This is the one non-fiction book. This is kind of where I want to start with Indigenous Australian non-fiction. I have other books on my like non-fiction list that I want to get to, but this is where I want to start. So I'm not going to mention those other books until I've read this one. It's a progression, we'll get there, but this is the first book I'm looking into. These are all the books that I am interested in at the moment. This is in no way a comprehensive list of all of the Indigenous Australian books that exist. I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned these books at the very least, just so that people know that they're out there and so that you're all aware of them, because I really want to rectify this kind of gap in my reading, and especially as an Australian reader, I feel like I should have read more Indigenous Australian like literature. So I'm very excited to make this list and to share it with you all. I really hope that you guys take something away from this, or at least you are aware of more books now than you were going into this video, at the very least. I will try and link as many resources down below as I possibly can. I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I should have said something else. I'll probably think of it afterwards, but thank you so much for sticking around until the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again next week with a new one. Bye!